In 1637, a single tulip bulb sold for the price of a Grand Canal house in Amsterdam. The buyer wasn't a fool. He was a respected merchant. His neighbors had already made fortunes flipping flowers. His brother-in-law had just doubled his money in 3 weeks. So he mortgaged everything he owned for a bulb called Semper Augustus. 2 months later, that bulb was worth less than an onion. This is the story of history's first recorded speculative bubble. But it's not really about flowers. It's about a glitch in human psychology that makes us believe something is valuable simply because everyone else seems to want it. And that glitch? It's still running today. Welcome to the Crooked Ledger, where money, psychology, history, and culture collide. Today, we're diving into the Dutch tulip mania of the 1630s. Not just what happened, but why it happened. Because understanding this story means understanding every bubble that came after it. To understand tulip mania, you have to understand the Dutch Golden Age. By the 1630s, the Dutch Republic was the richest nation on earth. Amsterdam was the center of global trade. The Dutch East India Company was worth more than Apple, Google, and Amazon combined in today's money. There was so much wealth sloshing around that people literally didn't know what to do with it. Into this sea of prosperity sailed a flower. Tulips had arrived from the Ottoman Empire decades earlier, and the Dutch had become obsessed. But not with just any tulips. The most valuable were broken tulips, flowers with dramatic flame-like streaks caused, we now know, by a virus transmitted by aphids. These patterns couldn't be predicted or controlled. Every bulb was a genetic lottery ticket. And here's where greed enters the story. Unlike regular goods, tulip bulbs could only be sold during a few months of the year, roughly June to September, when they were dormant. The rest of the time, they were in the ground, growing. So the Dutch invented something clever: futures contracts. You could buy the right to a bulb that wouldn't exist for months, which meant you could buy something, watch its price rise, and sell it, all without ever touching a flower. Psychologist Robert Cialdini identified social proof as one of the most powerful forces in human behavior. When we're uncertain about what to do, we look to others for guidance. If everyone's buying, it must be smart. If everyone's selling, we panic. In 1636, tulip prices started climbing. Not slowly, explosively. A bulb that cost 40 guilders in November might sell for 350 by January. People who had never invested in anything were suddenly making more money trading flowers than they made in a year of honest work. And here's the crucial detail. These weren't anonymous transactions. This was happening in taverns, in living rooms, between neighbors and colleagues. You could see Jan from next door buying a tulip contract. You could see him sell it a week later for twice what he paid. Watching your neighbor get rich while you stand on the sidelines triggers something primal in us. It's not just fear of missing out. It's a fundamental questioning of our own judgment. If everyone else sees value here, and I don't, what does that say about me? So people bought. Weavers traded their looms. Farmers mortgaged their land. One sailor famously ate a tulip bulb worth 3,000 guilders, mistaking it for an onion. He was thrown in prison. But social proof alone doesn't create manias. You also need greed, specifically the kind of greed that compounds on itself. Here's how it works. When you make money on something, your brain doesn't just register profit. It registers I was right. Each successful trade increases your confidence. And increased confidence leads to bigger bets. By January 1637, tulip prices were doubling weekly. Some bulbs were changing hands 10 times in a single day. The highest recorded price was 5,500 guilders for a single Semper Augustus bulb. For context, a skilled craftsman earned about 300 guilders a year. People weren't buying tulips anymore. They were buying the expectation that someone else would pay more tomorrow. This is the definition of a speculative bubble. When price detaches from any underlying value, and becomes purely about anticipated future prices. And here's the crooked part. Everyone involved knew, on some level, that this couldn't last forever. But they believed they were smart enough to get out in time. Every single person thought they'd be the one to sell at the top. February 3rd, 1637. A tulip auction in Haarlem. For the first time in months, nobody bid. The auctioneer called for offers. Silence. He lowered the price. Still nothing. The buyers had vanished. Within days, tulip prices collapsed across the Netherlands. Bulbs that had been worth houses were now worth less than common vegetables. People who had traded their life savings for futures contracts were ruined. The courts were flooded with lawsuits. But here's what most people don't know. The Dutch economy didn't collapse. There was no depression, no widespread financial crisis. The tulip trade was actually a relatively small part of the Dutch economy, confined mostly to the merchant class. The real damage was psychological. For decades afterward, tulip became a Dutch insult for someone with more money than sense. The shame of the mania haunted families for generations. We'd like to believe we're smarter now. We have regulators, economic theory, historical hindsight. We wouldn't fall for something as obviously absurd as paying a house's worth for a flower. But look at the dot-com bubble, the housing crisis, cryptomanias, NFTs selling for millions. The pattern repeats because the psychology hasn't changed. Social proof still works. When your colleague is making money on something you don't understand, you still feel that pull. When everyone around you believes an asset will keep rising, your brain still tells you they must know something you don't. And greed still compounds. Early wins still inflate confidence. Paper profits still feel like real wealth. The Dutch merchants of 1637 weren't uniquely foolish. They were human. And that's the uncomfortable truth about financial manias. They don't require stupidity. They only require humanity. Money isn't just numbers in a ledger. It's a mirror of human ambition, power, and folly. And in every age, the ledger has always been a little crooked. And in every age, the ledger has always been a little crooked.